When Dedrick Smith disappeared, his loved ones were left wondering if the young man who suffered with schizophrenia had simply run off to start a new life, leaving his phone, his girlfriend, and his memories behind. Or did this kid have a terrible accident? And even worse, is it possible that he was murdered? Let's examine how we use GIS mapping and investigative analysis to help our friends at Adventures with Purpose find Dedrick's body. It's time, folks, for the Profiling Evil classroom. Well, welcome to this session of Profiling Evil's Return to the Classroom. Today, we're talking about the missing persons case of Dedrick Smith, a kid who disappeared in the early morning hours of October 2006. Profiling Evil was asked by Jared Lysick of Adventures with Purpose to dig into Dedrick's background and provide the search team, led by Doug Bishop in this particular case, with as much information before they landed in North Carolina as possible. Now, Doug's going to be joining me during part of this video, and I'm bringing back Taylor Nicholas of TGI Crime Day to help me tell Dedrick's story. And folks, as we get started, you're going to notice that some of this was filmed earlier, some was filmed tonight as we tied it all together. We did all this as part of a strategy we had with Adventures with Purpose to help give them a little heads up information in advance and then move them carefully into the investigation and later report on what we learned to give you a little more about the story. So let me welcome Doug Bishop. Now, this is a case where we actually did the work months ago. We're coming back and we're finally releasing the content that kind of set the groundwork for Doug and his team as they went out into the field. So, Doug, let's just jump into here. What was it about Dedrick's story that convinced you to take the team to North Carolina and look for this young man?
Well, first of all, this case obviously lined up with what we need, to align with what we specialize in, and that's he was missing with his vehicle. There was some work that was done, but not a lot of water searching was done. Law enforcement as a whole, they really need something to allow them to justify the use of resources. And this is one of those cases where there was nothing to go off of. Nothing. They did their due diligence with putting out the word and, putting it in the different databases and systems, the B.O.L.Os and all that good stuff. But outside of that, there was nothing for them to say, hey, we have to continue to utilize resources. And, because of that, we knew very little was done. And it's not a knock on law enforcement. Like I just said, there was nothing to go off of. So this was a perfect case for us to bring our resource in. And, we specialize in finding vehicles underwater.
And it's really the reality of resources on your side as well. And frankly, for us at Profiling Evil, when we try to help you, this was a particular case where you happen to be in a pretty close geographic region. So with the hundreds and hundreds of requests that you receive every month of please help us find our missing loved one, you also have to do it judiciously and kind of figure out what's going to fit a current road trip. But the question I got for you on this thing here is, you reached out, you said, hey, we need you to do a little digging and give us a little advice or a little information. How helpful really is it to have this kind of background information and some of the stuff that we have tried to provide you as you go out and do the work in the field?
As critical as it gets, the different levels of investigating when you're doing a search, whether it comes down to trying to produce a lost person behavior profile or just learning more about the geography of the area you're going into. So many different aspects of what it takes to actually do an intelligent and accurate, efficient search. The information that you were able to provide us, like, on the different bodies of water that were there and so forth. The different, levels of, communication that were taking place with law enforcement and so forth. That's all really critical to everything that we do. Once we're actually arrive in town, it makes everything we do more efficient.
Having a loved one go missing is one of the most terrifying things a person can face. Another layer of worry is added when the missing person could potentially be in danger because of a diagnosed mental illness. Dedrick Bernard Smith called his mom, Deborah, late on the night of October 2nd, 2006, to let her know that he was staying at his girlfriend's house and wouldn't be home until the next morning. Deborah was shocked when she got a call the following morning on October 3rd from Dedrick's girlfriend asking to speak to him. Deborah thought that Dedrick was staying with his girlfriend, but his girlfriend said that she went on a late night food run, and by the time she got back, Dedrick was gone. She assumed that he decided to go home, but forgot his phone at her place, so she was trying to get a hold of him through his mother.
So I got to ask you a question here. I mean, this is a 26-year-old kid, isn't it? So for people to be upset that maybe he was spending time away from home and stuff, again, this is an adult that happens to be living at home.
Exactly. So he would occasionally stay with his girlfriend. From what I understand, he would stay over there about once or twice a week, but most of the time he did stay at his parents' house. Deborah knew right away that something was wrong. Dedrick had daily contact with his family, and it was very unlike him to go anywhere without his phone. I think that a lot of people around that age definitely, the phone is attached to the hand at all times, especially in the middle of the night. So she was very concerned for his safety because Dedrick actually had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and he was taking medication for that at this time.
So was the medication, do we know what the dosage was, or I assume at least daily?
I believe it was just daily. I didn't see anything that was specific about that, but it looks like it was just a daily medication because they were really concerned when he left and they didn't see him after multiple days in a row. He needs that medication for everything to be okay with him. And so I know that that added another layer of shock and surprise because he wouldn't just leave, especially without that medication and especially without telling his family who he was always in contact with.
Yeah, I mean, so in a case like that, what did his family do?
So Deborah jumped into action very quickly. She reported him missing right away, and there were a couple of possible sightings of him around town. They were called in, but none of them led anywhere. It was all just dead ends. And that was almost 16 years ago, and Dedrick has not been found, and his car has also not been found.
Well, this is a great place for us to step into the classroom for a minute, folks. I want to talk about eyewitnesses. In Dedrick's case, there were several sightings of this young man in the days following his disappearance. And then again, were there really sightings? Well, many people think that an eyewitness account is the most valuable form of evidence that's out there. In reality, it isn't the case. Eyewitness accounts can be influenced by a whole bunch of things, including the environment, lighting, life experiences, and personal biases. You know, I often use an example from my days in the police academy, clear back in 1980, to help teach this principle. It was 1980. It was summertime. It was an incredibly warm day, and it was right after lunch. I found myself sitting in a classroom with 30 of my classmates trying to stay awake in a terribly dry presentation on the law. Suddenly, the door flung open to the classroom, and a masked man entered the room. He fired 3 shots toward our instructor, who fell to the ground. It was amazing. The entire encounter lasted less than 5 seconds, and the intruder fled out the door. Well, before my classmates and I could even compose ourselves, the instructor sprang to his feet, and he announced that the shooting was only a simulation, a drill. He then instructed us to take a moment and write down everything that we could remember about the shooting that we had just witnessed. He wanted to know what the shooter looked like. What kind of weapon was he firing? How many shots did he take? In the end, our instructor gathered our responses and he asked us to defend our memories, which, in his opinion, could ultimately be used as courtroom testimony if this was actually a crime. The recruits, including me, each had a different description of the assailant, the weapon, and the circumstances. So why is that? How does that happen? You see, eyewitness accounts can be complicated by many factors, things like lighting, distance, quality of eyesight, our life experiences, and even our personal prejudices. For example, I want you each to take a second. I want to have you hit the pause button after I ask you this question. So I'm going to ask the question. Get ready to hit that pause button. Then once you've written down your answer and you just seriously think about what your answer would be, you can hit resume and get back in the game with us. Here's the question. What color is a light blue 2018 Chevrolet four-door when it's sitting under a street light at 2 o'clock in the morning? Hit pause and let's get back in a minute. Well, some of you might have said that the car was white, silver, or perhaps even gray, or some other color. I wondered if your answer is taking into account things like the weather or lighting or other environmental conditions. And now I want to just kind of say my question was actually a trick question. I mean, a light blue 2018 Chevrolet four-door sitting under a streetlight at 2 o'clock in the morning is still light blue, right? So while my example is pretty simplistic in nature, imagine how an incorrect perception could lead an investigator down the wrong pathway. When eyewitness accounts of Dedrick Smith being spotted in other parts of the community came in, it took the police focus away from other areas that needed closer inspection. Now, these tips and leads cannot be discounted, but they come with a price, and often the price is redirection and missed opportunities.
Yes, the car was a turquoise 1993 Pontiac Grand Am. She said that it's a pretty distinctive car. It's a bright color. It's something that you would definitely notice. So if it was abandoned somewhere or if it was left in a parking lot or something like that, it would have been spotted by somebody since it was such a distinctive color.
That's interesting. Were you able to uncover along the way any additional kinds of things they did? I mean, did they run searches? Did police run searches? What did they do to try to find this kid?
Yes. So, along with those sightings, there was once that someone thought they saw him at a local soup kitchen, but by the time the family showed up there, or that they realized that it possibly could have been Dedrick, he was long gone at that point, and he wasn't spotted there again, which I find kind of weird. I feel like if he had like the wherewithal to go to a soup kitchen, even if maybe there was something going on where he didn't know who he was or he didn't know what was going on, to go to a soup kitchen once and then never show up there again feels really weird to me.
And did the family do any kind of flyers that they passed out, anything like that?
So I think that they did flyers, but they for sure did put up a billboard in 2012. A billboard was put up along Silas Creek Parkway that had a picture of Dedrick with all of his information. I don't think that they ever got any valid tips from that. I know there was one that was called in because someone saw someone who fit the description walking along a highway that sometimes Dedrick would drive down or walk down. But again, by the time anybody showed up to see if it was him, he was gone. And along with the billboard in 2013, they put out a $10,000 reward that was basically good until the end of that year. And in December of 2013, the family announced again, hey, we have this reward. If you know anything, please come forward and let us know. And there was no one ever came forward to try to claim that or to give information along with that reward money.
Don't know if I ever told you this, but when I was in college, I worked in a psychiatric unit for about 3 of the 4 years that I was in undergraduate. And I learned a ton from the psychiatrists and the nursing staff there about schizophrenia. And over the years, I've tried to increase my knowledge on this subject. My master's degree was about criminal behavior, and it covered a lot of psychology things. But I always go back to an event that happened when I was working in the psych unit. And one night I was talking to a guy. We were having this normal conversation, and all of a sudden he just completely flipped out and attacked me. And we had this brouhaha while I tried to get him under control and get help. And afterward, I was just so confused that someone could just turn on me so quickly. And I was completely unprepared for that. And I remember the doctor sitting down with me, the lead psychiatrist that was on that particular night. And he said, here's the thing. And he taught me this. Schizophrenia is this incredibly serious disorder where people interpret the realities around you and I completely abnormally. And for them and for this guy, he suffered hallucinations, delusions, and extremely disorganized thinking and behavior. And the thing that was so interesting is he ended it by saying, in his mind, he was talking to you one moment, and you were a friend. And in an instant, the schizophrenic's mind would envision you as a lion that was trying to kill them, and they were fighting for their life. I don't think I've ever forgotten that.
Yeah, that definitely would be something you would stick with you. I do think that it's really interesting, and you would know better than I would know, but I think from what I have read and what I've heard, with schizophrenia, it can tend to show up in people around that age range, like between 24 and 27. Is that correct? That it can kind of start to show itself in that mid 20s range? Do you think that's something that could have contributed to, possibly, if that is kind of what contributed to him leaving?
Well, clearly he had schizophrenia if he was taking
Hmm.
medication and had been diagnosed as a schizophrenic. And I don't know about ages and at what point those manifest themselves, or those behaviors start to manifest. What I do know is that I've been talking to a lot of psychologists recently because of other criminal cases that I'm looking at, about whether schizophrenia is also something that's hereditary and carried on. But as we think about Dedrick, this kid was taking medication for paranoid schizophrenia, right?
Hmm.
Uh, but it seemed, by all accounts, that he was a pretty normal kid. I mean, what was he doing in his life besides seeing his girlfriend once a week?
Yeah, it seems like he was doing really well. And, whatever events led up to him being on the medication, we don't know. But once he was on the medication, he was taking classes at the local college. It was, let's see, he was taking mechanical classes at the Forsyth Technical Community College. So he was going to those classes, he was attending them. I think I read somewhere that his family had taken out a loan for him to be able to go and do these classes, and it was going really well. Up until that point, he wasn't in any kind of trouble. He wasn't having any kind of other outside issues that we know of. And he was performing well at school. He was going to his classes. He was excelling. And so that's why I think that part of this is so strange, is that it just feels like it came out of nowhere.
As I looked into Diedrich's background, I found a number of interesting things, though. He had some misdemeanor charges in his past, but nothing that would suggest that he was violent or that he was prone to just take off. I mean, Taylor, those are really interesting kinds of things to think about, because there's nothing in his history that would support that. Now, he comes from Winston-Salem. The area of Winston-Salem has a population of about 250,000 people, and it's known for its historic involvement in the tobacco industry. But most importantly to this case, the area is ranked highly for technology markets, something that Dedrick was studying, as you said, at nearby Forsyth College to be a mechanic. Now, his mother describes him as a good son who actually called her on the night before he disappeared just to tell her that he loved her. He reminded her that he wouldn't be home that night and that he would be staying with his girlfriend. It was anguishing to read a newspaper account where she said that not knowing what happened to him is torture. She continued by saying it's like somebody just took a knife and just grinding in your stomach. There's no release. You just can't let go.
So the distance from his parents' house to his girlfriend's house wasn't very far, only about a 10-minute drive. And it doesn't seem very likely that Dedrick and his car could have gone missing on that drive, because it was mostly through a populated area. It didn't look like he was having to take back roads or anything like that. There was a search that was done along Highway 52 between the Forsyth County line and Hickory Tree Road. So that was a stretch where Dedrick would travel frequently. So they checked that area. It has a lot of thick brush and trees along the edge that could potentially conceal a car if you were to veer off of the road, but they never found anything there. There were multiple searches that were done. And when I was looking over the area, I noticed that there were two bodies of water that stood out to me. They were only a few miles from his house. So, do you think either of those areas look like they could be a potential spot where someone could go missing without anyone noticing?
I like the fact that you're thinking about water, because he's not in plain sight. at least. And they've had the benefit now of 16 years, if I remember what you said earlier, that they've had wintertime when there's no foliage on the trees. And then, of course, summer when people are out in the woods like crazy. So places that a car would go are generally less remote than places a truck might go or something like that. So I like the idea that somehow this guy either leaves the area entirely or something goes wrong and he hits a body of water, for instance. And this is where our friends at Adventures with Purpose really show their stuff. Hey everybody, it's Mike from Profiling Evil. I've been studying criminal behavior for more than 40 years, and one of my favorite research tools is Truth Finder. It's online, and you're not going to believe the information stored there. So if you want to know more about that new neighbor, your babysitter, or your next online date, give Truth Finder a try. I'm including a link below with special discount pricing. You got to click the link to get it, and then enter EVIL10 at checkout. We're an affiliate, which means we get a small commission, enough to buy a small Diet Dr. Pepper, but you can cancel at any time. Thanks for listening today. I thought what might be helpful again is to take a moment and look at a map, and there were a number of routes that could be taken to get from Dedrick's parents' home to his girlfriend's home. But as I looked at each of those, a couple of things that I found that were interesting is they going back and forth between the girlfriend's home and his home, they really only cross over one water body, Salem Creek. And this is absolutely an area that the team is going to need to look into as they go and look throughout the area. Salem Creek is just south of the Salem Parkway. And Salem Parkway is really interesting because it leads over to Salem Lake. And I know that you did a little research on Salem Lake, that in most places it's only about 30 feet deep. Well, depending on how clear that water is, it could be 6 or 8 feet deep, and people would never see a vehicle that was down in the bottom of that. So 30 feet is really quite a ways down. In fact, for those who have been watching Adventures with Purpose just the last couple of weeks as they've been on this most recent trip around the United States, they recovered a man in 24 feet of water in his vehicle still after 19 years. So not at all outside of possibility of being able to find a vehicle in those depths. I was with the team one day when we recovered a vehicle that was, so these guys are the pros, and I'm really looking forward to what Doug and the team on the ground there are going to be able to turn up. Now, well, it wasn't long before Jared Lysick's team discovered Dedrick's vehicle at the bottom of a nearby lake. I want to play a couple of segments from that first unedited video that we did announcing the discovery of Dedrick Smith.
All right, I want to introduce and welcome everybody to today's breaking news. When it comes to breaking news, we're going to be talking about Dedrick Smith out of Winston-Salem. Our team with Adventure with Purpose ended up finding Dedrick yesterday, and the recovery took place early this morning. With that one, we currently have Doug Bishop, we have Carson McMaster, and we have Dylan Myers that are traveling in the RV. We're going to let Doug and his team give you the entire rundown in just a few moments. We're also going to be introducing you to Mike King from Profiling Evil, who is on with us today as well. With that one, Doug, I want to bump things over to you so that way you can kind of bring everybody up to speed as to the case and who Dedrick is.
Outside of that, we started here yesterday about 10:30, looking for Dedrick Bernard Smith, 26 years of age. He went missing back October 3rd of 2006. He was last seen at his girlfriend's residence, where he left in the middle of the night and was never seen from again, him or his vehicle. With those facts, we put together an investigation before we even got here with Mike over at Profiling Evil, which we'll get into in a little bit. We'll explain, his leading into process of us getting here. We had his girlfriend's house where he last disappeared. We then to the southwest in Winston-Salem had his home address where he resided, as well as the college he attended. So we had some good information here in our area to set up a search perimeter of 5 miles. Once we set up that search perimeter of 5 miles, we then identified bodies of water within the region that we deemed deep enough
to conceal a vehicle, especially a vehicle for 16 years. Yesterday, we began our search up there at the biggest waterway, which is going to be Salem Lake. Now, we searched Salem Lake for several hours, was not able to uncover any vehicle whatsoever in that lake. The second on our list, which was 0.8 of a mile from his last known location, was Winston Lake. Now, when we got to Winston Lake, we did discover several vehicles there within the lake. We did some diving. We did a lot of sonaring, stolen vehicles. And then one of the last vehicles that we identified on sonar in Winston Lake was 1993 Pontiac Grand Am, which is what Bernard Smith was driving, which is a turquoise Dedrick Bernard Smith there. That's his picture. Very handsome young man. He was 26 years old when he went missing. Dedrick did suffer from paranoid schizophrenia and amnesia. He was known to be found in locations confused and not quite sure how he got there.
In that video, Jared asked me to share a couple of ideas about the case, specifically around the geography. And some of this is what I've already covered, so I'll try to fast forward through it.
After we're done, we'll get the questions as well. So we'll go bring Mike King on here and I'll stop blabbing for you.
Well, I got to tell you what, Doug, you and Jared were the brainchilds behind this. And we at Profiling Evil are just thrilled to be working alongside of you and participating in the recovery. How meaningful this is for families. I've been doing this for 40 years, looking at cold cases, and the missing link has been having hard-hitting guys like you guys to get out there and do the real work. And I got to tell you, I don't know if I'm young enough for this. I mean, you guys, you do a full day of diving and recovery, and then you jump in your van and you start driving to the next location. And that's usually when we brief about the case that you're going to be looking at a day or two later, depending on how far you're driving down the road. Thankfully, Jared's rigged that vehicle in a way that you can put full streaming video up on the screen, and I can share with you thoughts of what we're finding out in the investigation. Because in these cases, we have this really cool thing that we used to talk about as we sat around in profiling circles. And we said that the thing that law enforcement generally wants to ask, and maybe all of us, is the whodunits. But in reality, what we really need to do is look at who the victim is and then try to figure out, why did they become a victim? We call this victimology. And so part of this podcast, and the thing that Jared's asked me to do, is to go in and look at this case from an investigator's perspective. Look at the victimology, if there are issues around the locations, to look at some of the geographic kinds of considerations. And as we do that, it starts to increase the number of questions we have, but it helps you guys start to narrow in on where we really want to focus your efforts. And so I just want to bring up this map here and then talk about this map for a second. Here, in this particular case, to give everybody kind of a big idea, we look at GIS, Geographic Information Systems. We zoomed in on the neighborhood in which this girlfriend was living and where Dedrick was visiting. And then we start plotting out what's the most reasonable route that someone might take to get from point A to point B. What would a normal person do? What would somebody that maybe is dealing with schizophrenia do? In this particular case, we saw a number of locations that had to be checked just on the route over to Winston Lake. For instance, this river, big enough that a car could end up, another river, big enough that a car could end up in. And then finally, what really made sense is to get right over to that lake. And man, did we hit this one right, the nail on the head, or what? Because this is the exact route that this young man would have driven to get that vehicle in the water. But well, and for law enforcement, this is a great opportunity for law enforcement to kind of evolve a little bit. A drum that I've been banging for a long time, as you know. I spent a career worrying about just keeping everything close to the vest, but we need to recognize that social media in law enforcement is more than having a Facebook page or a Twitter account. It's really leveraging the public to get information back that you can use in an investigation. It's reaching out and using groups like you guys. I mean, holy cow, you're coming in for nothing. And this is a resource that an agency could really take advantage of. Thankfully, this is an agency that embraced you once they heard you were in town and doing the work.
So I do think that it is really interesting because as I do these searches, when you're just looking at a broad map of it, it's so hard to tell what the area actually looks like. And the bodies of water can either look bigger or smaller based on the perspective of your maps. So going on Esri maps and be able to actually look at what it looks like in life as if you were standing on the edge of this quarry, it's so much bigger than I imagined it being. It has these rock walls that come up on the side of it, and it's about 100-foot drop, I believe I read. And then the quarry itself can go up to 100 feet deep. From what I saw, before about 2012, it was a little less settled around it. It was mostly just trees, and it was kind of like a hideaway spot that was a beautiful area that people who like really knew about hiking knew where to find it. And then in about 2012, the city took it over and decided to make it an actual city park. And then from there, they broke ground and put in trails so that you can actually just walk up to it. They put in an overlook bridge that even just looking at the pictures of it made my stomach drop because it's so tall and it just goes out over the water so you can see the whole thing. But I was thinking before that, now I feel like if someone were to somehow have some sort of an accident where they did drive off of the side of the road into the quarry, I think you'd be able to tell. There are trees, there are fences that would be knocked over if that were to happen. But back in 2006, before they had done any of that construction, I just wondered if it was even possible for someone to get that close to it and to go over the edge. And that might be a crazy idea, and I'm like looking for the craziest options, but it did seem very interesting to me that before about 2012, it wasn't a super populated area that people would have known to look.
I like the way you're thinking on this because, again, I think of a recent case that I worked with the Adventures with Purpose guys on, where the victim in that particular case turned up in some trees about 50 feet off of a major highway, and she'd been missing for 2 years, still sitting in her vehicle. So these are the true needle in haystack situations where it boils down to a whole bunch of luck and as much science as we can put behind them. But I want to ask you just a couple of questions from a common sense point of view. If we were to go back and try to theorize what might have happened to Dedrick, and let's say that he had a schizophrenic event while he was at the girlfriend's house and she was out getting munchies, and he took off. What's the likelihood that he would end up in some city somewhere in America and 16 years later still not have made contact with anybody?
That seems so out of the realm of possibility to me, but it's not impossible. I think that it probably happens, but I think that it's interesting if that was him that was spotted at that local soup kitchen. It just seems weird to me that he would, like, how would you go and start a new life and have no idea where you were or what was going on and then be able to stay away for that long? Or like, wouldn't he have a moment of clarity where he would want to go back home and figure out what had happened? I just don't know if that, do you think that's possible that he could have just like wandered off and gone to a different city? I just don't know. Even if you were having kind of that mental place where you don't know where you are and you don't know what's going on, I just don't know why you would just leave and go to a different city and then what? Even if that is what happened, what is he doing there now?
So yeah, and I always go back to this point that he drove away in his turquoise vehicle. That vehicle has also disappeared off the face of the map. If he were pulled off on the side of the road having a schizophrenic event or crashed into another car, police would come to that scene, investigate it. They would look at the plates on that vehicle, the VIN number, the registration. They would have followed up and said, who is this guy that doesn't know who he is?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I assume he walked around with identification. I would assume that inside of his vehicle were things that told his story, maybe from Forsyth College, a parking pass, or something that would drive investigators back to this missing person, because it clearly was a publicized missing person case. And we also know that he loved a phone. So if he loved a phone, he would have probably picked up another one. Now, we would need a psychologist and an expert to testify whether he could remember his home phone. But I would have a hard time thinking, even if you were schizophrenic, you couldn't remember things from 26 years of your life. So I have a hard time buying that this kid's alive anywhere, that it seems more likely to me that there was a terrible accident and that he fell victim to the accident.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. That's kind of what I thought as well, especially because as far as we know, there was nothing leading up to that he was having any problems with anybody in his friend groups or in his life. By all accounts, he was going to school, he was seeing his girlfriend, he was going to his parents' house, and he kept in touch with his family regularly. They seemed to be very close. And so for him to just disappear, and especially the car, that's the thing that gets me every time in these cases, that when there's different scenarios and different options, the idea that someone's car just like poof vanishes and no one saw it anywhere. Like, how far can you drive? And it's a Pontiac. Like, it's not like he was in a truck that could go off road and up into a mountain somewhere. So it just seems really strange to me.
Yeah.
So, Mike, with this case, they have enlisted the help of a local missing persons expert or advocate who works and volunteers with NamUs. That has been kind of helping the family. So I know that they do have him in NamUs so that people can be keeping an eye out. What would your advice be for anybody who has maybe a missing loved one who definitely has that mental illness at play that could add to that? How do you go about getting someone in NamUs? I've always wondered that. And how do people, when someone turns up somewhere, what does that process look like to look through NamUs and make those connections?
I'm not sure if NamUs takes submissions from the public. I've got to do a little research on that. They certainly would take it from public safety, and I would hope that they would also do that for anyone that's missing where they've been reported by members, family members. But there are also other groups out there that provide those services. The DOE network is a great service. I know the people that drive the DOE network. I know that the Charlie Project and the woman who runs that do a great job, and those are volunteer kinds of places. So I would say reach out to every one of them, because the more you have a reach, the better chance you have of finding someone who's going to stumble across it and be able to respond to it. And again, this boils down to exposure, and these people need exposure. When it happens, especially if you have a family member or a loved one who disappears that suffers from mental illness, call law enforcement immediately. I believe they did that in this particular case.
Yeah, they definitely were on top of that and got him reported as soon as possible. I was also wondering, with something like this, obviously, with very important tips and information, the best thing to do is immediately take it to law enforcement. But we have seen a lot over the last few years with social media being able to share photos of these people that have been missing and spread the word through that. Do you feel like that's a good outlet for people to use to get it on social media so that it can be shared as much as possible for keep an eye out for this person?
Absolutely. Share everything you can in social media, but preferentially talk to law enforcement before you put out information, so that you don't do something that might create problems for the investigation, especially if it's a criminal case. But this is about bringing people home, and get that word out in every way you possibly can. Yeah, those are great points, and thanks for bringing them up, Taylor. In this case, we reached out to more than 40 folks, 40 different phone numbers of people who were associated with this young man. And of course, those records go back 16 years. Not one agreed to come and talk to us or even respond to our requests. It could be that every one of those people had numbers that have changed. But in some cases, it's that people just wonder if you're really someone that's out there trying to help or someone that's trying to exploit. So if we had more information from people that were intimate with this case, we might be able to provide more insight.
I just hope that they are able to find answers. And I hope that as we cover these cases, and for the ones that they don't find the vehicle and there is not an answer at the end of the day, I hope that there is some kind of a sense of closure, or not necessarily closure, but a sense of peace, knowing that people are still doing the work and still looking for these lost loved ones. And I think that even sometimes just checking off the options that are not the correct answer to what happened to them can be somewhat helpful. And at least you know where they are not, so that you can continue looking in hopefully the right
Well,
place.
I want to thank Jared and Doug and the entire Adventures with Purpose team for allowing Profiling Evil to provide insights and investigative support on these cases. I asked him to jump on with me for just a minute to talk about the value of this kind of collaboration and what it means to families like Dedrick Smith. Well, it's kind of interesting because like in this particular case, as we looked from his girlfriend's house and we started to work our way from his parents' house to some of the lakes that were nearby, some of the rivers that are crossed. But as we went from his girlfriend's house, the last place he was known, she gets the munchies, she bugs out for munchies, and then something happens. At least I believe that with this kid, and frankly, he suffers with schizophrenia, and something happens that all of a sudden it's a good idea for him to jump in the car and head out as well. But as we were looking at the map together, and I remember you were sitting inside of the motorhome, we had that projected up on the wall, and we're talking about the two rivers that you have to cross to get from her house over to the lake. And the first river, you just cross over the road. I mean, but I can't tell how deep those things are. The next one, you're running parallel to the road as you're heading toward the lake. But how important is it that your eyes are really determining, hey, this one might look great on a map, Mike, but it isn't worth looking at?
Oh, very, very important, and we kind of run into that with every case where we kind of look at it together, whether that's from you showing us what exists or from us just briefly looking at it. And a lot of times, I tell you, a lot of places in America, we're looking on satellite and we think we may have 4 or 5 bodies of water to check in this 5-mile radius, and several of them don't even exist anymore, or they barely exist because of drought. Whether, that's a whole nother subject area with, overconsumption and then warming or whatever you want to contribute to it. But being there and seeing it is completely different. There's waters we can get to and we think, oh my God, this is deep. We got to search this. And it's really shallow. Or we get there and you can clearly see by standing on the bridge, I can see the bottom. Let's just move on. So there's a lot of different variables that take place, but actually being there definitely, boots on the ground is a completely different scenario.
This was a pretty remarkable one though, because just a few days earlier we found Jimmy Amable. Then you're down here in North Carolina, and I really feel grateful that I've been able to kind of feel the emotion in the texts as you say, we found Dedrick. Why don't you take folks back to the moment you found Dedrick and what happens?
Coming into it, like you just said, we knew that he had some mental issues with schizophrenia and amnesia. So we knew we were possibly looking for, an accident scenario, possibly a suicide scenario. The Salem Lake there was kind of the most prominent body of water nearest the home, just a few miles away. And then we had Winston Lake was our second location, which we went to, and that's where we found him, less than, I believe 0.8 of a mile from his last known location at his girlfriend's house where he disappeared there in Winston Lake. And, as I'm diving on that car and, I knew it when I saw it on sonar. I knew it. Like I knew that was the car. I could tell by the way it had settled into the bed, the style, but diving on it and getting that confirmation was, it's so much. There's so many emotions, but it's, we're focusing on the positive. I'm telling myself that we've just found Dedrick. He's been missing for 16 years. That's what I know that I'm doing in that moment is something that nobody else has been able to do. And there's a family now that's going to have answers, a community, and it's in a respectful way, really rewarding. As tragic as it may be, it's we don't process it like that. Our perspective is, what we're able to do in producing answers is positive and it's powerful.
The positive side of it is there's so much work to do that you don't have time. And so you package away emotion, but it eventually comes. And you and I had a long discussion about this the other night. We're not going to talk about it here tonight, but as we think about Nick finding Kylie, for instance. Those are emotions that you pack away because there's a job to do, but there's a due date on every one of those. And I really am glad that you guys work really judiciously in making sure that you're getting the help you need. But here's the thing I'm hoping you could maybe touch on as we wrap this up. You had a chance to get that information, not just to law enforcement, but to the family. What was that conversation like?
Oh, Mom was very, 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 what's the right word to use? Mom was very emotional. She was devastated. Like, this just happened, you know. She lost one of her other sons previously to some other circumstances, and this was it was very devastating for Mom. You know, his uncle, Dedrick's uncle, was there. He was a pastor. He's very supportive, very thankful, and pretty much had to take over for the family. And they're, at the end of the day, they're very thankful that they now have answers. And it's just devastating to a family to hear, no matter if it's 2 weeks or 16 years. It's all that emotion, like you said, it has a due date, and that due date was that day when we found Dedrick, and it all came to fruition and it came out. But they were all very extremely grateful at the end of it.
Well, thanks for what you do, Doug. Today the thing that inspired me to get a move on and get this video out, I drove past a little Korean market that 35 years ago I walked through the doors on when somebody blew the market up and killed members of the family that ran that little market. And you don't forget those things, and they come back at the strangest times. And, today I can look at it, and I look at it healthy, and I understand there's a job to do, and we go out and we do it. And I'm really glad I'm not in the saddle doing those and walking in those doors, because I don't think I have either the rough edges or the testosterone or whatever today that I had back when I was a young buck. But you got a big trip coming up, and I don't know if we want to share anything about that. But the one thing we do want to share is we want to drive people to subscribe to Adventures with Purpose so that they get the notifications, especially when you have those instant wins when we let people know. Do you want to share anything about what's coming up?
We're still in the arrange preparation, gearing up, and planning all these cases. As you know, with these cases, each case has so many moving parts, and scheduling we're still working with. So we'll be leaving here in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be another 35-day trip, and we're starting out with 2 teams. It's the first time we've ever started a trip with 2 teams. So we plan to tackle twice the amount of cases, and hopefully we'll be able to produce twice the results we've been able to produce. That's the game plan. No matter what we do while we're doing it, every search is a successful search. If we're not solving a case, we're covering ground and ruling areas out in a case. So everything we do when we're out on the road is 100% successful. I can't get back out there quick enough. Really, it's an honor to be able to help so many people, to help so many agencies. And, I'm really, really eager to see both these teams get out here on the road and produce a lot of results.
I'm excited for you. I can't wait to hear what's happening. I look forward to talking with you as each day passes to kind of know where you are and what you're doing next. Well, you guys be safe and know that I'm comfortably sitting in my chair rooting you on.
All right, we'll be in touch, and I'll definitely once we get these cases lined up and stuff, we'll work some stuff out, man.
Hey, folks, make sure you're subscribing to Adventures with Purpose. Doug, I know Jared's busy tonight, but I love you guys. I hope you just find a lot of success, sadly, and that we move forward and help some families along the way. Thanks for stopping in tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Well, there you go, folks. I hope you enjoyed this return to the classroom where we discussed eyewitness accounts. Now, this one is really tough when we think about Dedrick and challenges with schizophrenia, along with many other mental health diseases that come into play in these cases out there. They change the playing field when it comes to risk reduction. Now, there's no question that Dedrick lived a higher risk lifestyle by virtue of his mental illness. In my opinion, his risk increased when he had his girlfriend head out for snacks at 2:00 in the morning. It left him there alone. Now, his risk level also increased when he apparently hatched the idea that he too was going to drive somewhere. And if he did so while suffering a schizophrenic event, there's no telling what could have led to this trip going into the lake. I mean, think about it. In a schizophrenic's mind, this kid could have thought he was driving on a wide open, multi-lane road when he entered the water. Or he could have been fleeing some type of situation that had him terrified. And more than likely, a situation that never existed in true reality, but it existed in his reality. You know, the experts over at Janssen suggest that the following tips would help you if you ever interact with somebody who has schizophrenia. I have multiple times, not only in college when I worked in the psychiatric unit, but all throughout my law enforcement career. Number one, speak calmly and clearly and simply when you're talking to someone who has schizophrenia. When you're communicating with them, try to just discuss one issue at a time and leave time for processing of the messages there. Number two, practice active listening and lean in when you're paying attention to these guys. Let them know that you're listening and repeat what you're hearing them say so that there's no question about what communication is going on. Number three, be sensitive to how this person is feeling, and if possible, try to acknowledge the seeming realities of their beliefs without supporting the delusions. Number four, if this individual you're dealing with is withdrawing socially, try to talk to them in a light that's positive and forward-thinking and progressive and, I guess positive is the best thing. Number five, if your friend is or your loved one is saying or doing something that doesn't make sense to you, ask questions to help you determine what's motivating their behavior. And if possible, use that motivation to encourage them to do something that's a little more positive. Number six, if your loved one's refusing to take their medication, try to focus your conversations on how medication will help them achieve their goals. And above all, get them back in contact with their medical or their mental health provider. Hey, I really hope you've enjoyed this segment of Profiling Evil's Return to the Classroom. We're once again visiting cases that we've worked with, Adventures with Purpose, and a whole bunch of other kinds of cases. Make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button on our channel, folks. Hey, and please consider our channel memberships. If you're a member of the Profiling Evil Academy, you're going to be the first to catch videos like this one. If not, you'll be getting it next in line when we do our general public releases of the videos. Hey, you can find Profiling Evil on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you like podcasts, you can catch us on your favorite podcast platform. So don't forget to check us out on the World Wide Web at profilingevil.com. And while you're there, make sure you're signing up for the free B.O.L.O. B.O.L.O stands for Be on the Lookout. That's Cop Talk. It's our free digital newsletter. And keep in mind, we're never going to share your information. Hey, I want to thank Taylor Nicholas of TGI Crime Day for joining me on this broadcast. And I want to thank Doug Bishop for jumping on. Please go over to Taylor's YouTube channel and subscribe. And thanks again, folks. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.